means. But a person who's making $60,000 and he goes and buys a Ferrari, he has now committed israf, because he's gone outside of his ability. And this is what the reality of israf is. And a brother, he just asked me recently, he said, well, how do we prevent the shine and the luster of the dunya? How do we stop our children from going and chasing after the dunya? He said, well, I said to him, it really depends. How did the Prophet ﷺ prevent it from his companions? Did he just keep telling them the dunya is bad? No. He set an example. He ﷺ lived a very simple life. He ﷺ, there's nothing extravagant or showy about him. But we complain about our children running after and going toward the dunya when we ourselves, and I understand everybody has different, has different needs, and I understand everybody has different problems and issues. But if all my children saw me doing growing up was working 10, 12, 14 hours a day, what is going to be important to them? What is going to be their goal? If they never saw me picking up a mushaf and reading, they never saw me sitting down and talking to them about Islam, they never asked me about what I was doing in my Islamic studies, how much importance are they really going to give to all these things? When they see me trying to always get the newest and the latest and the greatest, they see me loving something, then naturally, they're also going to love that thing. And our children they are a reflection of us. They really are a reflection of us. But it's very challenging, it becomes very difficult for us to point our fingers at ourselves, saying that my son or my daughter, well, that he's too much into these particular things, when we ourselves are. My child is spending too much time in front of a screen. Like, how much time am I spending in front of a screen? My child's spending too much time playing video games. Well, who keeps buying him new games every time he asks? Am I putting limitations on it? Well, my kids, they spend 6 hours a day playing games. I mean, was there a limit that was placed? Did you do something about it? Or did you just allow him to keep playing? And if he's doing something either without our knowledge or because we haven't said anything, then who's really at fault? Is it the child or is it us? We don't put limitations and then we cry about how these limitations are being broken. Instead of setting a time for everything, because if we organize ourselves, and then we organize our families, it makes a huge difference in the outlook of our children. But unfortunately, many of us ourselves are unorganized. And I've seen this problem in many, many, many masajid. That we are busy investing in ourselves, how we want the masjid to look, how we want the masjid to run, how we want the masjid programs to look like. But how many of us are bringing our children in and planning a succession strategy? This is something from very different than how the Prophet ﷺ dealt with his companions. He used to bring the young companions and have them get involved. Because he had a succession strategy. He knew that there was a new generation that was coming. He ﷺ, he didn't create the masjid and just hold on to it like it was his baby, like it was his egg. He didn't try to maintain exactly how it was supposed to be. If the companions had an idea, if people wanted to come and live in the masjid, he ﷺ, whatever the community wanted to do, he was a representation of that. Our problem is we want to take full ownership of everything. We want to. If I don't do it, if I don't take care of it in this way, it's not going to be taken care of. With Allah, this all goes back to forgiveness and seeking tawbah. I don't have the ability to do anything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who has true ability. He's the one that created all of these things. Do I have true tawakkul? Do I have true reliance on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if I'm thinking like this, or I'm thinking in this way? And then we have the opposite spectrum. Leave it up to Allah. I mean, there has to be a middle ground. Yes, we leave it up to Allah, there's no doubt. But what means did I take to leave it up to Allah? I have no investment plan. I have no long-term care plan. I have no money to leave behind for my children. And you ask, what are you doing? What are you going to leave for your children? Leave them up to Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of it. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was asked, he said, by Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, from what I remember. He said, Ya Rasulullah, he said, I only have one daughter. I want to leave all of my wealth in Allah's path. The Prophet said, no. He said, okay, what about 2/3? He said, no. He said, half? He said, no. He said, what about 1/3? He said, and even 1/3 is a lot. It is better that you leave your children money behind than they go around begging for others for money. Meaning that we need to have financial security plans for ourselves and for our families. It is the salah of somebody, illa man rahimullah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, obviously the hearts of everyone is different. But in general, the person who has paid all his bills for the month, the one who's paid his rent, or the one who's paid his lease, or the one who's paid his mortgage, and the one who's paid all his bills, his salah is very different than the one who hasn't, and the one who doesn't know how he's going to pay those things. Having that financial security, having that financial ability, it really makes a difference on the mentality of the individual. He'll be much more relaxed than the one who's constantly worried about his bills. He'll be sitting in salah worried about how am I going to pay my electric bill, how am I going to pay my gas bill. But having that sense of financial security is one of the reasons we have a zakat system, of why we have that social security net. Is to help catch those people, or help catch those individuals who fell through the cracks, those who didn't have that ability. And one of the ways to make sure that system is maintained, لا تصرفوا, by not being extravagant as individuals. If we all held ourselves accountable as individuals on where our money was going and how it was going, then it means that we'd have more money directed toward these services to help people who are in need. And our money goes in so many places, and how many of us really hold accountable on where our money is going? How many of us really keep track of our expenses? And some of us might be very good with our money. But there are certain places our money goes that, I wonder, I said, well, does anybody even ask? How many of us pay taxes? How many of us pay property tax? How many of us ask where that money goes? How it's being used? In what way? Just imagine and just think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, well, you paid $50,000, $60,000 in your life, or $100,000 in your life on property taxes. And He asked me, and you didn't say anything about where that money went and how it was to be used. And just imagine if Allah asked me, and what answer would I have? What would I say to Him? This is something we're paying regularly. You sent your children to these schools, and you didn't say anything to anyone about the curriculum. You didn't even ask. What if Allah asks me? What if Allah says something to me? What am I going to answer? What am I going to say? Many times, we are our own biggest enemy. We will blame the West, we'll blame the media, we'll blame the government, we'll blame all of these different sectors of society. My response is, we should blame ourselves. And it's sad that we have all this ability. We have all these routes, and we don't take advantage of any of them. We really need to ask ourselves, why is that? Why is that the case? How come we refuse to help one another? How come we refuse to help ourselves? Or how come we refuse to recognize the problem? But we're very quick to talk to each other about israf. You spent too much money on this, or you spent too much money on that, or you shouldn't eat out so much. It's his money, it's halal. It's her money, it's halal. Are they using it in a haram way? If they're using it in a haram way, they have every right to speak. But if they're using it in a halal way, what's the problem? What's the issue? They're not hurting anyone. If anything, they're helping business, and they're helping the economy, and they're contributing. There's khair in that. But there are very few of us who are willing to help ourselves. Ilallahi marji'uhum, and turn to Allah. And this is part of turning to Allah, because I am turning to Allah as an individual. And I'm recognizing my problems, I'm recognizing my shortcomings, and I'm trying to make an effort to do something about that. So, I think we have about 5 minutes until we end. But I'll end here. وَبِاللَّهِ التَّوْفِيقُ وَاللَّهُ أَعْلَمُ وَصَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَى خَيْرِ خَلْقِ نَبِيِّنَا مُحَمَّدٍ وَعَلَى آلِهِ وَصَحْبِهِ وسلم. If we have any questions, inshallah, we'll take questions until Ishraq. No?
You said in the starting the ayah of the Ya Bani Adama. What is the?
I said, Ya Bani Adam, خُذُوا زِينَتَكُمْ عِنْدَ كُلِّ مَسْجِدٍ كُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا.
What surah or what number?
I'll get it for you, inshallah. I'll get it for you. That's not a problem. Anyone else?
Regarding the israf you mentioned, considering the times that we live in, sometimes, just to give an example, our weddings nowadays happen in very extravagant ways, sometimes in ballrooms, and we have to fight our whole family and especially our wives and spouses for this. So what tools can we use to avoid this? I mean, it comes as a big pressure here.
No, so there is a big pressure. So the question is that many times the groom will be forced from his family to have a very lavish wedding. I don't want to use the word extravagant. Huh? he has a very lavish wedding. What are some things that he can do to maybe mitigate or to stop that? I think having open conversation is very important, and learning how to take a stand. And this is something that we will break and we will fall under pressure, and this becomes very challenging. I remember my parents, they were actually pushing me once, with concerning an issue. And I mean, I think my stance was very staunch. It was too harsh at the time. But just to give an example, that there are ways that as a groom you can push back. But the thing is, as when we're grooms and when we're looking to get married, what do we want? We want to get married, right? So many times we're willing to overlook. It's like it's the most difficult time. Like you just want to get married and you want to get through the things. You just want to be done with it. And every time your parents or family members or like aunts and uncles, everybody's pushing you to different things, and you're like, okay, yeah, fine. Let's just get it over with. But it's at that time that we really have to stop and think. And I understand that our mind is in one direction and it becomes very challenging. But my parents had said they wanted to do something. I don't remember what it was. And I said to them, yeah, but I'm the groom. And they were like, so? I was like, well, it's not going to be much of a wedding without me. and I understand that not everybody can take that stance, not everybody can take that position, but sometimes having conversation in how much things cost and where the money needs to go. So talking about expenses after the marriage is a very healthy way of talking to both families. Talking about, okay, well, we'll need a car, we'll need a place to live, these are some of the expenses that we have. Is it possible that we move some of the wedding expenses to cater to those? And like I said, having that conversation is usually more productive than saying that, oh, this is too extravagant and lavish, because that's subjective. It becomes very difficult. How do I describe lavish? What is the level? Is $100,000, is that the level for lavish? Is it 80? Is it 75? Okay, is it 75,001? And is it lavish now? Do you understand? This is where it becomes difficult to kind of decide, and what is the determining factor for something that's extravagant and lavish. It's very important for us to kind of change the conversation and say, hey, I'd rather spend X amount of money and invite X amount of people because of this. If the response is, well, like, no, your cousin had a wedding and he had 500 people, so we need to have 550 people, then it's just kind of a roadblock at that point. So I can't imagine it being very, very easy. But I know people, because they've sat down and they've had conversations, it's actually been very successful for them. They've managed to have either they removed one ceremony altogether. You know, on the subcontinent we have, mashallah, about 7 different ceremonies that take place. But they managed to remove, all of them. And they had the nikah and the walima in one, and they made it into one joint function. And both families partook in that. And then